All right, we are back at it today, and we're going to talk about revolutions from 1750 to 1900 period, how those Enlightenment ideas are ultimately going to lead to movements of political revolution. So what do you need to know? People around the world are developing a new sense of commonality based on language, religion, social customs, territory. That's that idea of nationalism, right? We've also got this era being marked as the beginning of a period of revolution and rebellion against existing governments inspired by Enlightenment ideas. Discontent with monarchies and imperial rule is going to encourage the development of new systems of government in the 19th century, like democracies and the creation of 19th century liberalism. So we're going to give a closer look to these four Atlantic revolutions. And with each of them, we'll talk about what the revolution was and then how revolutionary this revolution should be seen. And we start off with our very own American Revolution, beginning in 1775. This is a revolt of American colonists against the British Kingdom. It's a response to new taxes that were levied on colonists who lacked representation in the British Parliament. The key ideals of the revolution are based on Enlightenment ideas that are laid out in Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. Remember, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a direct connection to John Locke's ideas of natural rights of life, liberty, and property. The French would aid the Americans in order to weaken their British rival during this American Revolutionary War, and ultimately the British surrender in 1783. So how revolutionary was this? Absolutely revolutionary, right? It's a break from the king and from the British Empire. This has never happened before. You haven't had a colony breaking from a mother country before. It's a formation of a new and independent nation based on principles of representative government. It is the end of the monarchy for American colonists, but not so fast. Colonial structures in society will largely remain even after the revolution. The elite of the American colonies ended up being the elite of this new American republic. Slavery was kept intact and would remain a reality in the United States until the aftermath of the American Civil War in 1865. Women still have no political voice in the American government, just as they hadn't in the colonial governments. So let's hop over across the Atlantic to the French Revolution. This is inspired by the American Revolution, but with different goals. This was a movement to abolish the monarchy outright. And that monarchy, remember, was legitimized by the Roman Catholic Church and the traditional aristocracy. The French Revolution looked to end all of that, a separation of church and state, an ending of traditional nobility and social classes in France. The goals laid out in the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. That was interestingly written by the Marquis de Lafayette, who many of you guys know from his fame in the musical Hamilton. How revolutionary was this revolution? Absolutely revolutionary. They ended the monarchy. They took the King of France, Louis XVI, and put him into the guillotine. They abolished the feudal class system. No longer will there be titles of nobility in France. That is now gone. There is a separation of church and state within the French Revolution. They went so far as to even rewrite the calendar because you can't have a separation of church and state. Excuse me. And have a calendar based on Christianity. You can't have 7 days in the week because that's based on the book of Genesis and the 6 days it took God to create the universe, and the seventh he rested. So they rewrote it all, but not so fast. Slavery is maintained. Women will still have no political voice. The French Republic will quickly return to rule by an emperor in the form of Napoleon, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's look at the Haitian Revolution, also inspired by Enlightenment ideals and the political chaos that was happening in France. Haiti, or what becomes Haiti, was the French colony of Saint-Domingue, and it was one of the most important and profitable colonies of the French Empire that was largely made up of enslaved Africans. 90% of the population was enslaved. In the 1790s, Toussaint Louverture will lead a violent revolt against French rule. And after a series of conflicts, not only against the French, but eventually the British who tried to come in and take over this colony. And so as to suppress this revolt and not have other revolts in British colonies nearby, like Jamaica encouraged, the British would need to be fought as well. Ultimately, independence by 1804. This was absolutely revolutionary. They break from France, they end the monarchy, they become independent, they end slavery. But how revolutionary was it? Well, this was pretty revolutionary. This Haitian Revolution is a big deal, but they would face tremendous challenges. As incomprehensible as it is to us today, the government of France required this new nation of Haiti to essentially pay for the lost property of the enslaved Africans that French owners would lose, and this put Haiti behind an economic 8-ball that would be virtually insurmountable for the next century. Also, other Atlantic states and colonies did not want to do business with Haiti for fear that might encourage their own uprising movements. And to this day, Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the world. The Latin American revolutions, also inspired by the Enlightenment, challenges to the rigid social structure of the caste system in Latin America. The Latin American revolutions were led by demands by Creoles. Remember, those are the sons of Europeans born in the Americas who wanted more political and economic control. As their numbers grew, and Peninsulares became a smaller proportion of the population. Simón Bolívar would lead an independence movement against Spain out of what is today Venezuela. He drafted a letter from Jamaica, what is known as the Letter from Jamaica, that outlines his revolutionary ideals based on Enlightenment principles. And other Latin American nations would follow. How revolutionary? Absolutely revolutionary. Independence is going to be gained. Spain is going to be pushed out of much of the Americas. It's the end of the monarchy. There's more political power for Creoles, but slavery will be maintained. Women will still have no political voice. The wealthy elite will still dominate the political classes. We move on to talking about nationalism. We talked about this a bit in the last section, but nationalism, as a reminder, is a sense of commonality based on language, religion, customs, maybe territory. And it's driven by Enlightenment ideas in the French Revolution that proclaimed that French people are citizens of a nation and share those bonds of nationhood rather than subjects of a king. And we're going to see manifestations of this nationalism in the creation of national anthems, of which France is the first to have one, and national flags. And we'll see many nationalist movements grow through the 19th century. In the early 19th century, Balkan nationalism, the Balkan Peninsula, southeastern Europe, will see Greek and Serbian movements for independence from the Ottoman Empire. In the South Pacific, Maori nationalism, indigenous New Zealanders who fought against British colonial control. In the Ottoman Empire, with concerns that they're losing a lot of these ethnic groups, the Ottoman Empire attempted to foster an Ottoman nationalism to unify a diverse Ottoman Empire into one nation. And this is going to prove to be very challenging because of the ethnic diversity and religious diversity that existed within the Ottoman Empire. And in the late 19th century, in the Philippines, the propaganda movement, which will call for reforms and more political equality for Filipinos who were living under Spanish colonial control, and ultimately a push for independence. So what do we got here? Enlightenment ideas inspired revolutionary movements on both sides of the Atlantic. Some political revolutions were more revolutionary than others, hat tip to Haiti. And a new wave of nationalism is going to spread through Europe and beyond that creates new national identities and calls for political independence from colonial rule. Talk to you next time.